Here are the so-called sweat barometer standings for college football games entering the week of November the 12th, brought to you by OffshoreInsiders.com, led by me, Joe Duffy, CEO and Grandmaster Handicapper, but we feature things such as the Master Lock Line. These have been the best teams to bet on. We put it in order of the so-called sweat barometer rating, so of course also known as against the spread margin or margin of cover. That is how much a team covers the spread by, or in our next category, how much they fail to cover the spread by. As you can see, using that parameter, Florida Atlantic, Iowa State, and Arkansas State, the three teams that have covered their games this year by an average of double digits. In that first column, of course, would be, well, the first column, of course, is the team name. The second column would be their actual spread record. As you can see, Army, although 5-5, they are covering by an average of 7.4. So this really is able to distinguish between those very deceptive spread records where a team, they might be covering a couple games by a close margin, and then the games that they don't cover, they are failing to cover by a wide margin, or vice versa. So Florida Atlantic, Iowa State, Arkansas State, Fresno State are teams that have obviously, the odds makers have underestimated. These teams are better than the odds makers thought. Who have been the best teams to bet against? Ball State, San Jose State, New Mexico, and Kent State. And Florida State has failed to cover this year. They may have the worst spread record, but they are, sixth in the nation, sixth worst in terms of margin of cover, or best to bet against. In Ball State, yeah, they fail to cover by an average of 15.4 points per game. Of course, at Joe Duffy's Picks, the anchor of OffshoreInsiders.com, we know exactly how to use this. And college football tends to be much more of a momentum sport, where the NFL, conversely, is a little bit more of a regression to the mean sport. But we want to give you the raw data. We report and you decide. And this also applies to over-unders. The biggest over teams, Louisiana, Monroe, has gone over by a very wide margin this year, going over by an average of 16.9 points per game, far and away the best in the country. Western Michigan, despite a new head coach, they are still very much a wide open team, going over by an average of 11.2. And you can see some other teams that have gone over by double digits: Maryland, North Texas, Arizona, Ohio, and UCLA. And yeah, and you'll see, often it is the smaller conference and the lower profile conferences where you can really sneak under the radar as far as totals are concerned. Well, Purdue, their games have gone under 8 of 10 this year. Akron's gone under 9 of 10, and Middle Tennessee at an 8-1-1 rate. But Purdue is the top under team. They've gone under by an average of 11.8 points per game. Akron, Middle Tennessee State, Wyoming, and South Alabama, some of the other big under teams. Remember, for the best sports picks in the world, they're at OffshoreInsiders.com, www.offshoreinsiders.com. Perhaps of note, Florida State, one of the worst spread teams in the country, and also one of the bigger under teams. Miami of Florida is going under 8 of 9, although they're certainly not by as wide of a margin as some of the other teams. Of Miami of Florida, one of the top teams in the country, obviously, and in part because they have been involved in some very low-scoring games by Mark Richt. Well, again, how to apply this information? OffshoreInsiders.com definitely knows exactly how to do that. And visit us on a daily basis. Joe Duffy's Picks is on one of the great rolls of all time. In fact, as we filed this report, 13-6 in the NBA, 2-0 college basketball run, but the NFL has been beyond absurd. 123-79 as this report is filed. That goes back to preseason. Joe Duffy's Picks, the anchor of OffshoreInsiders.com.